But I guess the big thing is that I did get better. It did improve. The light at the end of the tunnel as I started to come back out of that depression and started finding moments of joy and enjoying things was so reassuring.
Welcome to Breastfeeding with ABA, a podcast brought to you by volunteers from the Australian Breastfeeding Association. Breastfeeding with ABA is a podcast about breastfeeding, made by parents for parents. In this episode, I'm speaking to Jennifer, who is sharing her experience of breastfeeding and postnatal depression. My name is Jessica, and I'm a breastfeeding counsellor with the Australian Breastfeeding Association, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, my name's Jennifer, and I'm also a breastfeeding counsellor and breastfeeding educator with the Australian Breastfeeding Association. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also the mum to 2 teenagers, and this is my story of my experience with postnatal depression after the birth of my second child.
This podcast records in different parts of Australia. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're recording on and the lands you're listening on. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Indigenous people listening. We also acknowledge the long history of oral storytelling on this country and of women supporting each other to learn to feed their babies.
So today we'd like to acknowledge we're sitting on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people and pay respects to their elders past and present. And I just wanted to add, if it's okay, Jess, that something that I find really amazing about the little bit that I've had the opportunity to learn about the Dja Dja Wurrung is that they're 2 kind of, I guess, probably the best term is totem animals, although I'm sure there is another term for it. A bunjil, who's the wedge-tailed eagle, and Wah, the crow, both of whom I can see at times through the windows that we're looking out today.
So, Jennifer, you're talking about your experience today going through postnatal depression with your second child. So this was before you were a volunteer and qualified with ABA, is that right?
Yeah, I knew about the association, but I wasn't a member at the time when all of this started.
Okay, so set the scene for me. You're pregnant with baby number 2. What's life like at this point for you?
So I've got an almost 3-year-old, very busy little boy who was delighting in my pregnancy and wanting to kind of experience every part. When I went into early labour and was rocking my hips, as I went for walking, every time I stopped during a contraction to rock my hips, he would stop and rock his hips with me. So we spent a lot of time together and I was very close to him. I was living probably 20 minutes from my parents with my partner and my little boy in a small community which is part of Bendigo called Eagle Hawk. I lived near a little lake and I had this sort of lovely little space and was really excited about the arrival of this new little one. Didn't know what I was expecting, was just really looking forward to this and was quite well and healthy and managing really well, working, being a mum, and I think I stopped work when I was like 37 weeks pregnant or something.
Wow, that's impressive.
And I went into labour at just around 38 weeks, so I only had a week off between the end of work, which I'd loved, and I wasn't quite ready. I was counting down. My son was born at 41 weeks. So I was counting down to 41 weeks the whole time and I wasn't anticipating going into labour early at all. And so when I started having some signs, my body was approaching before 38 weeks. I was like, oh, goodness me, this baby's going to come a bit early. And I didn't even have the clothes washed and ready like I had with my first. So it was a little bit of a surprise that this little one was coming a bit earlier. But I was super excited and stoked to meet my baby.
So what were your expectations for what life would be with baby number 2?
Well, I breastfed my first till he was 2 and then pretty much fell pregnant straight away with number 2. So I was anticipating breastfeeding my baby. I was anticipating that my child who turned 3 just before this baby was born, and I would spend a lot of time together with this baby. My son would go to family daycare one day a week, so he had a little bit of an outing, but that we would be there and I knew how to do things. I was feeling really confident about myself. I was a little bit unsure about how I'd managed, 2 to start with early on with the fatigue and stuff. But I'd really felt quite confident as a mum, like I'd been here before. I knew what to expect. I had lots of things in place, so meals in the fridge already and nappies washed ready to go because we used cloth nappies at the time. And I think I was like expecting this bumpy journey in the first maybe 5 to 6 weeks with not a lot of sleep. And once breastfeeding got going, that we'd be fine.
So what happened next?
My second child, my little girl, was born after a very complicated labour and then an emergency cesarean. She was very distressed during the labour. I had meconium liquor. My waters broke before we went to the hospital. She didn't cope with the labour at all. And when she was born, so she was 38 weeks, she was 2.3 kilos, so very tiny, totally unexpected. She measured normal length. 2.3 kilos is £5.1 in the old money, so very small, and normal length. So she wasn't little in any other way other than that she had no fat at all on her body pretty much. She looked, I remember the doctor said, oh, she's very little compared to what we're expecting. And it showed me my baby over the sort of screen during the emergency cesarean. And I said to the doctor, that's a scun rabbit, not a baby. What happened? Like, I was really shocked. She needed help to breathe, which my son hadn't needed any help, but very quickly came to my chest. And in theatre, attached and breastfed, was like, in fact, when she was born, she came out of the cesarean wound and was held up, and you could see her tongue out, and she's like, where is the boob? Like, she was like, I've been dreaming, like, that placenta sucked, I want the boob now. Like, and she did. She was ready to park on my breast and breastfeed, and she did. She crawled to the breast, and pretty unusual at that stage. My wasn't something they often did, but it was what I wanted to do, and she latched on and she fed right there in theatre. And I thought, wow, this baby, unlike my first, it took a while to get it, knows what to do. This is going to be great. She's a bit small, I'm sure we'll be right. And then she started struggling. So we got back to the ward, and she couldn't maintain her temperature, and her blood sugar levels were dropping because she didn't have fat stores to cope. I had collected colostrum antenatally because I'd heard about it, and I thought it would be useful just in case. And I have incompatible blood with my partner, so there was a risk that my babies might have really severe jaundice, and so it was recommended. So I had about 100 mils stored that I'd collected
100 mils.
Yeah, overachieving, I think. That's very unusual, but
That's very unusual. That's such a large volume to express antenatally. I think the research says that somewhere
like
between 0
mils
to like 30 is huge.
And I expressed that in like a week. So I think my body was preparing for this little baby, and that I was going to need lots of milk for this baby. But I was lucky. It was really helpful. It meant that I was lucky in the end. She didn't actually need any formula, but she was very quickly whisked off to the nursery, and they put a drip in, and they wanted to keep her in the nursery because she wasn't maintaining her temperature. And I so didn't expect that. So my son didn't leave my arms or his dad's arms for the first, 6 weeks. He was pretty much in our arms or in the cot beside us or in the bed beside us, and, held by somebody who loved them all of the time. And my daughter lay in this little tiny isolette and looked so small and so fragile, and I felt really helpless. And all I could do was, I knew if I got good milk supply up and she could drink the milk, that she would be fine. So And one of the challenges, I was in a small rural, or in a rural hospital, a regional hospital, where there wasn't a lot of space. The nursery was pretty small. There was 2 comfy chairs for the 7 beds, and the rest of the chairs were just upright chairs. And I'd had an emergency cesarean, so sitting in those chairs wasn't very comfy. And if you were travelling from, say, Swan Hill or another rural area to come, they tried to keep those chairs for the mums who were travelling long distances to sit with their babies. So I was often ushered out of the nursery back to my room to make space, which meant I didn't get to spend that time close with my daughter that I wanted. And I really struggled with it. Every night I would lie in my bed crying when I could hear other babies cry and know I couldn't hear my baby crying. I couldn't respond to her needs. I really struggled with it.
Yeah, it's like having an urge that you can't.
Yeah, I couldn't scratch it. It was really, really difficult. And so all I could do was make milk.
Yeah.
And so many women, when they're separated from their babies, struggle to make milk. And it turns out I don't.
Yeah.
I was expressing 3 hourly, and within 36 hours my milk was in.
Yeah.
By the time she was 3 days old, I was expressing such a large amount that they were not telling me it was too much, but shipping it home with my husband to fill the freezer up, because I was filling the nursery freezer. I think I was making around about 2.5 to 3 litres a day.
Wow.
Which is way more than we're supposed to. And I wish somebody had told me, because when we finally did come home, my baby did not know what to do with all that milk. And I didn't come home with a pump because I'd left the hospital. So she had a drip in for a few days, didn't ever need oxygen, but did need help to keep her warm, and was in the nursery for 7 days. She didn't really ever lose very much weight. She lost, I think, maybe 50 grams in total. She maintained her weight the whole time, very quickly started gaining weight again. And as soon as she was looking more robust, about day 7, they roomed her in with me, and then we went home the next day. So once she was 8 days old, she was home, which was great. But the challenge was then that I had this massive milk supply, no pump because I didn't need one, and a baby who struggled. And that's when I first sought a bit of help from the Breastfeeding Association to help me manage this ridiculously large supply that my baby actually didn't need. Yeah.
So when did you realise that you were struggling?
So I don't think it was a long time. So the big thing when you've got a tiny baby is there's numbers. People want your baby to get to 3 kilos before they'll stop doing this, and then 3.5 kilos of it to wake really often for feeding and be monitored very closely. And I found all of that really stressful, worrying about the numbers. Even though there was plenty of milk and she was growing, I found myself feeling very anxious every appointment that the number wasn't going to be enough, and that somebody was going to say she has to go back to hospital or you're not doing enough. But I don't think I was aware of how stressed I was. It was just like my everything was trying to get this baby to this point where nobody was worrying anymore, including me. And I think what happened is I never really stopped worrying. Other people did, but then I almost sought out the same monitoring because I was struggling to relax. Yeah. So I think she was around about 4 months. She was feeding well, and she was never a big sleeper, but she was sleeping for sort of 3-hour blocks at night and feeding sort of too early during the day, and fairly settled, happy baby, and I was not sleeping. I was finding myself very stressed. And one of the things for me was that I realised I wasn't able to do anything else. I was able to be the mum my kids needed, so I was able to attend to my son and play with him. It took a lot of effort, but I would play, and I really enjoyed his interaction, and I really enjoyed feeding my daughter, and it was one of the one thing I was actually succeeding at, which may not be the case for other mums with postnatal depression. For me, it was the one thing I was doing well. But I wasn't able to make a decision about what food to eat, or what food to cut up for my son. I wasn't able to decide which clothes to wash. I couldn't go shopping because the decision-making process was so overwhelming, and nothing else gave me joy but my children. So I was never happy except when I was doing things with my children. I didn't feel sad. I just felt completely numb. I had no sense of joy. And one day I think I was sitting up, and the Breastfeeding Association used to have a 24-hour forum, and I was chatting on one of the forums, and somebody else talked about feeling numb being their symptoms of depression and not feeling anything. And I went, oh. So I went online and did a little screener in the middle of the night, and scored quite highly on the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale that's available and that health professionals use. And so when my husband woke the next morning, I handed it to him. I said, I think I need some help. And
had you done the screening throughout your daughter's sort of early life? Like, that seems to be now quite common.
I think it was checked with me at some point earlier on, but I don't think the score was very high, because I think it was more like I was responding to the situation and I thought I was otherwise. And I think I was managing well. I think it just went on too long, and I hit a wall maybe, and then I struggled. And I think I presented as coping quite well, because I was masking it, because I was a professional woman who knew what answers people needed. And I wasn't trying to hide. I just wasn't even honest with myself about how hard it was until suddenly I realised. So I'm sure it was done, but I hadn't done it with a health professional for a little while, like several months. And when I did it, it was I don't know what the score was, but it was high enough that it said, this is quite a significant score. And so I told my partner, and he took the next day off, and we arranged for me to see someone as soon as possible for a checkup.
Yes, I find that when I speak to mums who are coming up to that visit with their maternal child health nurse, that I always tell them, make sure you're brutally honest when you fill out that questionnaire or when you go through that screening with the nurse, because they're there to support you. Because I've heard from so many people that they go to fill out that score, and they'll either lie or they will lie to themselves.
Yeah. And I think probably it was the second for me. I just don't think I was aware of how much I was struggling. what then happened was that I was seeing my normal doctor we were pregnant at the same time, so she was on maternity leave as well. So I saw a different doctor that I didn't know very well, who offered to support me until I could get back to see my normal doctor. And the first conversation that was had was medication. And the challenge for me was, because my baby had been small, I was very nervous about her growth, even though she was now thriving. Fully breastfed, it always had been, and was now putting on weight and starting to have some little chubbiness. She never got super, super chubby because she just started off so slender. But she was looking more robust. And the first conversation was that they thought that I might need some antidepressant because of where my score was. But the medication they like to use sometimes suppresses babies' appetites a bit. And so I just said no. I said, I can't do that. So I decided to use counselling, and I linked in with a counsellor through the local health service who was able to help me. So I was speaking to somebody weekly. I was seeing we went back to the health nurse, so she was able to see me fortnightly. And then when my GP came, I was able to see my regular GP again. I was seeing her fortnightly. So I was seeing someone twice a week. I was seeing my GP one week, and then the nurse the next week, and then my GP and then the nurse. And I was also seeing my counsellor. And that was for about 3 months. And at the 3-month mark, I was sicker. I was struggling more. My mood hadn't lifted any. The counselling wasn't effective because I couldn't do the therapy work that I needed to because I was just feeling so numb. And I never got to a point where I felt hopeless, but I could see it was getting worse. And my partner was very worried about me, and so were the health professionals. And I was so lucky the Breastfeeding Association, I joined the local group and started going along, and I was, really enjoying the social aspect and learning about breastfeeding. And somebody said, there's a specialist helpline you can ring, or there's specialist services you can ring to find out about medication. And I so wish I'd known that earlier, because I made the call and spoke to one of the specialist pharmacists in Victoria, which is where I am, and they were able to tell me that actually the risk for that medication is highest in the first 3 months, and that generally babies' appetites after that aren't affected, and often it's not even that long. And if I'd known that, I think I might have trusted the idea of having medication, or I might have made a decision to try it a bit earlier. Once I started at 7 months, we went up gradually, and it took until I was my daughter was about 10 months before I started feeling more clarity. And when she was 12 months old, I felt like myself again.
Yep.
I continue with the counselling regularly. The appointments with the GP and the maternal child health nurse were able to space out as I became more well again. But I think they just kept an eye on me for that bit longer just because they were monitoring my daughter's weight in case it had an impact. So that support was critical. It really was. But I so wish I'd known about calling a specialist helpline.
Yep.
For that medication information.
Yeah, and even there's really very few medications that are actually contraindicated for breastfeeding completely. Yeah. And even when there's usually a safe alternative.
But even just with this medication, knowing that the risk of the appetite issue was particularly there in the first couple of months, and that as babies got older, it tended not to be an issue. If I'd known that, I might have made a different call at that 3.5 mark when they started talking about medication. I'm not upset with myself. I responded to what I knew, but I think I would have come out of it more quickly, and it wouldn't have been such a long journey. Really, I wasn't myself for out of the first 12 months, probably 8 or 9 months of my daughter's life, maybe even 10, and also for my son's 4th year, the same thing, that I was not who I wanted to be, and I was the most responsive mum I could be, but it wasn't the same as what I think I would have liked it to have been. We didn't do a lot of things that I had done with my first, because I just didn't have the energy.
So it sounds like you got a lot of support from your health professional team, as well as, specialist helpline to speak to, a pharmacist who specialised in lactation and medications, as well as your local ABA group. What was the most helpful thing that anyone around you did to support you?
So I think the most helpful thing, I think there's two. One is that my partner, who was the strongest person I know during this, I don't think I would have survived without some real challenges for me and the kids if he hadn't have been as amazing as he was, is that he worked out how hard it was for me to make decisions when I was really struggling. And so once a fortnight, we sat through the struggle of that and we made a meal plan for the fortnight. And then he made a shopping list that was like detailed down to how many things we want of toilet paper. So I didn't have to make any decisions if I did go shopping. He would do the shopping as well. But, it made it easier for me as I got a bit better to be able to do it without having too many decisions made to make. They were already made. Meals were made. As in meals were chosen. I could swap the meals. That was an easy thing to do. I don't feel like that tonight. We're supposed to have pasta tonight. I don't feel like that. I think we'll have the chicken. I could swap them, but I didn't have to decide what we were going to do. So he did that, and he also, in the very early days when we were really struggling, he used to make a lunchbox for me and my son, so I didn't have to choose food. I didn't have to go and look in the fridge and I don't know what to feed you, little man. There was a lunchbox, and that was a godsend because my son could go and get our lunchboxes and we would sit and eat them together, and there would be like a snack and a sandwich or something else, and he could put them back in the fridge. It was 3. He could open the fridge, put them in and take them out again. He didn't do anything else, but that was a gift of taking away some of the decision making, and that made such a difference to feeling like I was able to function as the mum I needed to be and meet my son's needs as far as nutrition. My daughter just needed milk in those early days, and meet my needs so I could meet hers. And it was fun. My son loved getting our lunchboxes out, and my husband would put some fun things in there. He'd put like Lego men, or he'd put like just little cute things in there, or stickers for my son to do or whatever. And it was every day he did that. And the other thing, so that was a really big thing. The other thing that happened that really did make a difference was that we were part of a church community, and I struggled to tell anyone, but my partner invited the minister's wife over to visit and said to me, I think you need to tell someone. We need some support. And so I did, let her know, and she'd been through it herself, so her response was, we'll help you. So twice a week, somebody else turned up with a meal that was hot and ready, with dessert, a snack for my son for the next day, and offered to hold my daughter while I went to the toilet and washed my face and hands and freshened myself up, and then made me a cup of tea, and we sat and had a cuppa, and then they'd leave. They didn't stay for anything else, and if I didn't feel like a cuppa, they would leave. But it was literally somebody turning up with this parcel of love for our family in those early days when that was really hard. And then, it was obvious that many people knew. Nobody said anything. It was no big deal. But as I started feeling better, people just say, I'm here and I see you. Mm. So that my community were there for me. I think that could have happened if I'd had lots of family and friends around, but we were new to the area. I just had my parents. So that became the equivalent of that for us. And that was a gift that I can never repay. Mm. Because I knew I was accepted and cared for without having to tell all of those other people anything. Nobody asked, nobody needed to know anything more than Jennifer struggling after the birth of her little baby, and they knew she was little. Mm. So this was a little way down the track. They'd offered us support when she was first born. They did it for everybody, but this was it just came back. And those gifts were the greatest things that happened for us. But I have to say I was very privileged. Mm. I also lived in a little community with a lot of elderly women. Mm. So I lived in a little area where a lot of women had retired, and it was a little set of units, and we were the only young people in the unit. And there were 2 women in their 80s who were delighted to have children, and when we played with our son in the area, they would love it. And so when I was struggling with my daughter and with my postnatal depression, they would take turns to check in on me and see if I needed anything, bring my paper in, say, would you mind if your son came and watched Play School at my place today? I'm feeling a bit lonely. They offered me support without ever asking how much I was struggling, just saying it. Then we never spoke about it. They were just there. I wish everybody had a village of women who are retired and wanting to be part of the life of a woman with a new baby, because I have to say, they would turn up and say, let me watch the baby, let me watch your son while you go and have a quick shower. And I'd come back and they would have done the dishes and folded a basket of washing. They were just these, I don't know, like fairy godmothers. And again, I think the world saw how much I was struggling, but nobody needed me to explain it.
Mm. Yeah. I often think that other mothers and parents who have been there in the same situation are the most valuable resource that we can have as new parents, because just to be seen and understood makes such a huge difference.
It was absolutely true, but I think it was also true that none of them needed me to say anything more.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes when you're struggling, you don't want to explain why and how hard it is. And even, what do you need from me? That was the hardest thing anyone could have asked me. And people did. I want to help you. How can I help you? I don't know. I can't even decide what sandwich to have today. I can't tell you how you can help me. But what happened was enough women, and even my mum when she was working, but when she was available, they just did what they thought I needed, and it was enough. It was a time I don't ever want to do it again. I learned a lot, and my partner and I probably became much stronger because of it. Our communication about emotional needs changed. We'd never had an issue like that before, so that was critical and really helpful when, you know, other people in our lives are struggling. We had a bit of a language about how we could support people. But I guess the big thing is that I did get better. It did improve. The light at the end of the tunnel as I started to come back out of that depression and started finding moments of joy and enjoying things was so reassuring. And when my daughter was about 12 months of age, she wasn't walking yet. She was very happy to sit on her bottom and play and crawl after her brother, but had no real desire to walk and didn't walk until she was about, 15, 16 months, something like that. Maybe 17. It was a while. But she was very happy to climb up on my lap. And I remember she was bringing me things. She would crawl off and bring me things again. And at one point, I found it so absurd, so funny that she was bringing me everything she could find that I started laughing out loud and giggling, almost like when I was a kid and you start giggling and you can't stop. It was just the funniest thing, because when she saw I was laughing, then she thought this was the best thing ever. I was engaging with her. I mean, I always had, but in a more sort of raucous and outward way. So she just kept bringing me the most ridiculous things, like a sock, and, you know, I found a tag and what's this? And like, I had all these things on my lap that were like, you know, kids find lots of things, you know, things that she shouldn't have been able to find on the floor, like the empty packet of some, all the tablets are popped out, but it's come out of the bin. She was getting things from everywhere she could find. My handbag, behind the sofa, under the sofa. She was bringing me pieces of leaves, everything she could find, and then coming and putting in my lap and waiting for me to laugh or show her delight, and then getting me more. And I suddenly went, we're back. I'm back. I'm enjoying this. I'm much more me. And yeah, it was like, I don't know, it was almost like I realised the cloud had been lifting for so long I hadn't noticed, but it had lifted. And I could see the colour of the world again.
So what advice do you have for other people?
I think I certainly had already had conversations. I had some challenges when I was at university and stuff, feeling a bit flattened down. So I knew that there was a risk factor for anyone who's had a bit of a past history. I'd never been particularly unwell, but, you know, I've certainly found moving out of home a bit of a challenge when I was a young student. So I was watching myself. I watched myself with my first, and, you know, let my partner know if you're ever worried about me, you've got my permission to book an appointment and take me to at least get a checkup. And I'm really glad we had those conversations. If you're worried about me, get me some help, because when I brought that piece of paper to him and said, I'm struggling, he didn't need me to tell him what I needed. We'd already had that conversation when I was well. When I was well enough to say, if I'm really struggling, I give you permission to book an appointment for a doctor for me and to come with me and sit with me and help me say what I need to say, because I don't think I'll be able to say it if I'm unwell. And that was really, really important, to have had the conversation with the people around me that I had risk factors. And to know what they are. You know, it's a history of depression or anxiety, maybe a history of trauma or of it struggling with adjustment, knowing that, you know, or even, you know, just getting really stressed at particular times, knowing that you might have a bigger risk. I mean, 1 in 7 to 8 women experience postnatal depression, and I think it's something like 1 in 10 to 12 men can experience postnatal depression or anxiety.
And those are just the people who we know about.
That's right. So I knew there was a risk, and I'm really glad I had that conversation. So I would say be open. If you know that, the people around you that you trust, tell them, listen, you know, if you're ever worried about me, let me know. And I think the other thing is it's okay to need help. It's okay to seek that help, and it's okay to ask questions. I I still wish I'd asked more questions about the medication and sought out more information, because while I hoped at the time medication wasn't something that was necessary for me and that I'd be able to do it without it, the reality is that I was probably already unwell enough that it was unlikely for me. And in hindsight, that phone call could have been made so much earlier. And even if it had been just a little bit longer before I started it, I think that the avoidance of the medication to protect my little one who'd been unwell actually made it worse for me. I think the other big thing I would say to people is know that you're not alone. It is challenging to experience postnatal depression or anxiety, particularly when you're supposed to enjoy this. This is, it's something you might have often been looking forward to for a long time. And even if it looks exactly like you expected and it's supposed to be going great, you can be feeling awful, and that you don't have to feel that way. That you can get help, and that you're not alone, and that many people have been there too. And I think that was the other thing, when other people said, oh yeah, it's tough, I was there once too. And that happened a few times. I've never really talked in lots of detail with anyone else about this before, other than my counsellors, but I've disclosed to other people in the past, oh yeah, I had postnatal depression in the past. And when I say to a woman who's struggling, when I'm supporting them as a friend or a family member, I know you're really struggling at the moment, I'm here. I don't share my story, but I might let them know I've been in a similar place and I'm happy to support you with whatever you need. And I think it's important to know you're not alone and to not try and do it on your own.
Yeah, I think that's really fantastic advice, and I think it's really quite inspiring to see and hear that you do go out and you use your experience to support other people in your community as well, and just, and I think it is just that important, just letting people know that they're not alone, because it's something that's so stigmatised, because as you said, we've got this expectation of women and new parents that this is supposed to be the most magical time of your life. You are supposed to be this one thing, and if that's not how things are feeling for you, that can...
You can feel like you're failing.
Yeah, and that's on top of already feeling, it's a bit of a
really
spiral.
Awful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's important to know you're not alone.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with me today, and I hope that other people listening to this podcast hearing your story will know now that they're not alone, and that's another thing that you've done to reach out through our podcast to let people know that it's okay to speak about and speak up and ask for help. If you do need help, you can check the links in our show notes, so we'll have some information in there about where you can find help and support if you're experiencing postnatal depression. There'll also be some other information in there about where you can find information about medication in your local area. If you're in a position to support the work that ABA does financially, you can become a member by visiting breastfeeding.asn.au, and that will link you in with your local group as well. If you want to speak with a breastfeeding counsellor, you can call the National Breastfeeding Helpline on 1800 686 268. So that's open 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Our live chat service is another option, and you can check the website to see when that's open. Thank you all for listening. We'd love it if you can rate, review and subscribe to the Breastfeeding with ABA podcast wherever you're listening.